Have you ever noticed how a really well-made animation can sometimes make a complex topic suddenly click? Like you finally get it, but then other times, a simple diagram is all you need.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, today we're going to dive into why that might be.
Okay.
We're exploring how our spatial abilities, that ability to picture things in our minds and navigate spaces well, how those abilities affect the way we learn from visual tools like animations and static images.
Interesting.
Yeah. And for this deep dive, you shared a research paper with me titled Unifying the Ability as Compensator and Ability as Enhancer Hypotheses.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
It really is. And it might have some surprising implications for how we think about learning, because essentially the research suggests that those of us who are kind of in the middle when it comes to spatial ability, we might actually benefit the most from having really good visuals.
Huh. That is interesting. So
Yeah.
are we saying, like, if I'm already amazing at spatial stuff, a fancy animation won't do much for me?
Well, that's one of the ideas we'll be exploring. But yeah, this paper digs into two main ideas about how spatial ability plays a role, and they seem kind of opposite at first glance.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Lay it on me. What are the two ideas?
So first, you've got the ability as enhancer hypothesis. This is the idea that people with higher spatial abilities get even more out of well-designed visuals.
So it's like they're already good with spatial stuff, and a great visual just boosts them even higher.
Exactly. Like the benefit of a good visualization doesn't really show up as much for people with lower spatial ability.
Okay, that makes sense. So what's the opposite idea?
Well, that would be the ability as compensator hypothesis.
Okay.
This one says that folks with higher spatial abilities can learn pretty well even from bad visuals, like a confusing static image or something.
Huh. So they can kind of work around it.
Yeah, whereas people with lower spatial abilities, they really struggle unless they have those good visuals, like an animation that shows them exactly how things work.
Gotcha. So it's like those with strong spatial skills have a built-in advantage. They don't need the fancy visuals as much.
Right. And the thing is, these two ideas have usually been seen as separate and maybe even conflicting, like they can't both be true at the same time.
Yeah, I can see how it would seem that way. So what does this research paper you mentioned say about that? Does it pick a side?
Actually, that's what's so cool about this paper. It doesn't pick a side. It argues that these two ideas, enhancer and compensator, they're not actually mutually exclusive. They can both be true, but it depends on where you fall on the spectrum of spatial ability.
Okay, a spectrum. So like low spatial ability on one end and high spatial ability on the other.
Exactly. Picture a line. On the far left, you've got folks with very low spatial ability.
Okay,
And for them, even the best, most optimized visuals might not do a whole lot. It's like they don't have the baseline skills to really benefit.
so the potential of the good design just doesn't unfold for them.
Exactly. Now, as we move along the spectrum to the middle, to people with medium spatial ability, this is where those optimized visuals can really make a difference.
Ah, so that's where we see the enhancer effect in action.
Yeah. These folks have enough foundational spatial ability to take advantage of a good visual design, so they learn much better with a good animation compared to, say, a low ability learner.
Makes sense. And I guess that also means the biggest differences in learning between good and bad visuals are going to be seen in this middle group, right?
You got it. And then, as we move further to the right on our spectrum, we reach the folks with high spatial ability.
The spatial wizards.
Yeah, basically. And they tend to do well regardless of what the visual looks like. Their strong spatial abilities allow them to compensate, even if the visual isn't ideal. So here we see that compensator effect.
So they're not as affected by whether they get a good or a bad visual because they can mentally fill in the gaps themselves.
Yeah, exactly. The middle group really needs that good design to help them along, while the high ability group can kind of figure it out on their own. So the biggest impact of good visuals might actually be for that middle group.
Wow, that's really interesting. So it's not as simple as good visuals are good for everyone. It's more nuanced than that.
Exactly. And to test this idea, the researchers did two things. First, they ran their own experiment called Study 1, and then they reanalyzed data from 4 older studies that looked at how people learn from multimedia. That's Study 2.
Okay, so two parts to their research. Tell me about the first study. What did they do there?
So in Study 1, they had participants learn the links between some abstract symbols and locations on a grid. Some people learned through static images that just showed the symbol and its location, and others learned through animations that actually showed the symbol moving to the right spot.
Ah, so the animation is considered the optimized design in this case.
Right. Now, to measure spatial ability, they used a task called the mental pathway span task.
Mental pathway span. That sounds like it's testing your spatial working memory.
Yeah, Basically, imagine someone gives you directions like put the letter A in the top left corner of the grid, then put the letter B to the right of it, and so on.
And you have to keep track of all those positions in your mind.
Exactly. So it's testing how much visual spatial info you can hold and work with in your short-term memory. And what they found was really interesting.
What did they find?
The relationship between this working memory capacity and how well people learned the symbols and their locations, it wasn't a straight line.
Yeah.
Meaning it wasn't just the higher your working memory, the better you learn across the board. The animation, the optimized visual, it seemed to help the most for people with medium working memory capacity.
Hmm. So those folks really got a boost from the animation. What about those on the edges with really low or really high working memory?
Well, for the low working memory folks, neither visual really helped them that much.
Mm.
And for those with super high working memory, they learned well from both types of visuals, static and animated.
So it's like their high working memory was already enough. They didn't need the extra help from the animation as much.
Right. Which supports the idea that the biggest benefit of good visuals is for those in the middle. Now, study two is where things get even cooler.
Oh, yeah. Tell me more.
They took data from 4 older studies that looked at how students learned about Kepler's second law of planetary motion. Planets speed up when they're closer to the sun and slow down when they're farther away.
Yeah. Okay. I remember that from somewhere.
Yeah.
So did these studies use animations too?
Yep. Some students learned from a static picture of the orbit, and others learned from an animation that showed the planet speeding up and slowing down as it went around.
Okay. So again, the animation is our optimized visual.
Yeah.
And how did they measure spatial ability this time?
This time they used a shortened version of the paper folding test.
Oh, the one where you have to imagine folding and unfolding a piece of paper with holes punched in it.
That's the one. It's a more classic measure of spatial visualization ability, how well you can mentally manipulate objects and understand spatial relationships.
So they were looking at a slightly different aspect of spatial skills here.
Right. And what they found, both for remembering the facts about Kepler's law and for applying it to new situations, the same pattern popped up.
Oh, so the people with medium spatial ability were the ones who got the biggest boost from the animation again.
Exactly. Those with low ability didn't show much difference between the visuals, and those with high ability did well regardless of the visual.
Wow, that's remarkably consistent across completely different tasks and ways of measuring spatial ability.
Right. It's pretty compelling evidence for this idea of a spectrum of benefit. But what does this all mean for our listeners? Why should they care about any of this?
Well, first off, this research helps explain why some studies on visuals and spatial ability haven't always had clear results. Sometimes good visuals seem to help a lot, sometimes not so much.
And that could be because of the different ranges of spatial abilities in those studies.
Exactly. If you're only studying people with high spatial ability, you're mostly going to see that compensator effect, where they do well regardless of the visuals.
And if you're only studying people with low spatial ability, even a good visual might not be enough to help them.
Right. So this idea of a spectrum helps us understand those past findings better. But more importantly, this research has big implications for how we design educational materials. If we want to get the most bang for our buck with good visuals, who should we be targeting?
The middle group, those with medium spatial abilities.
Exactly. Because they're the ones who are most likely to see a real jump in their learning with a good visual. For low ability learners, maybe we need to focus on different teaching methods or more fundamental visual supports. And for high ability learners, the visuals might not be as crucial.
So you, dear listener, if you've ever felt like a fancy animation didn't really help you learn, maybe your spatial abilities are already pretty high, and you can compensate even without the best visuals.
Or maybe you're in that middle group, and a really good visual could be just what you need to take your understanding to the next level.
It really makes you wonder if someday we could have learning environments that adapt to your spatial abilities. Like the system gives you a simple diagram if you have high ability, but gives you a full-blown animation if you have medium ability.
Yeah, like personalized visual learning. And the researchers actually talk about that possibility.
That's super cool. Now, before we wrap up, I think it's important to acknowledge that this research does have some limitations. It's not the be-all and end-all answer.
Absolutely. For one thing, the specific test used to measure spatial ability can make a difference. Different tests measure different aspects of spatial skills.
Right. So the type of visual and the type of spatial test need to be aligned. Like a test that measures mental rotation might not be the best predictor of how well someone learns from an animation that shows the stages of a process, for example.
Another thing is that just because something looks fancy doesn't automatically make it a good visual.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
What makes a visual optimized depends on the specific learning task and what you want people to get out of it. A visual that's great for learning one concept might not be so great for another.
And I'm guessing the difficulty of the material itself plays a role too, right?
Definitely. The researchers think that if the material is super complex, that enhancer effects, where good visuals really help, might actually shift towards people with higher spatial abilities.
Ah, so you need a certain level of spatial understanding just to even process a really complex visual in the first place.
Yeah, that could be the case. And finally, the researchers point out that this whole unifying idea, this spectrum of benefit, it might not just apply to spatial abilities. It could apply to other things too, like prior knowledge. Maybe people with a lot of prior knowledge about a topic don't benefit as much from certain visuals compared to those who are learning it for the first time.
That's really fascinating to think about. So, to sum it all up, this research is telling us that the relationship between our spatial abilities and how we learn from visuals is more complex than we might have thought. It's not a simple good visuals are good for everyone situation.
Instead, it's about understanding that there's a spectrum of benefit. Ability as enhancer and ability as compensator, they're not opposing forces. They're two sides of the same coin.
And that middle group, those with medium spatial abilities, they might be the ones who have the most to gain from really well-designed visuals.
Exactly. So it's something to keep in mind both for ourselves as learners and for anyone involved in designing educational materials.
Absolutely. And for you, our listener, we leave you with this. Think about how this idea of a spectrum of benefit might change the way you approach learning with visuals. Do you think you fall into the low, medium, or high spatial ability group? And how might that affect your choices when it comes to choosing learning resources or even just studying on your own?
Maybe take some time to reflect on your own experiences with visual learning and see if this research sheds any new light on why certain things worked for you and others didn't. You might discover something really insightful about yourself as a learner.
And hey, maybe it'll even spark your interest to learn more about this area of research. It's a fascinating field, and there's still so much more to uncover about how our brains make sense of the world through visuals. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It is a pleasure.
Until next time.